Good afternoon and welcome to Scotland's Political Leaders in Conversation with the Highland Business Partnership. My name is Liam Christie from Christie's Consultants, and I'll be your main host for the session this afternoon for the Q&A. And I'm also joined alongside me, or he's mobile just now, is John Murray, from one of the founders from the Highland Business Partnership. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to Anas Sarwar, leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and Rhoda Grant, a candidate for Inverness and Nairn for the Scottish Labour Party. John, before we jump in and speak to our guests, can you give Anas and Rhoda a little overview of the Highland Business Partnership, please?
Well, I'm only hoping the connectivity will keep us in tune, guys. It's a hot topic. No, thanks for coming, guys. The Highland Business Partnership, as hopefully many of the people listening in the group will be tired of me telling people, but for your information, it was born out of a little bit of frustration that we wanted the businesses to have a voice, a collective voice to raise issues, but also more importantly to collaborate and to work together and to create business opportunities together. So we launched it, myself and Gavin and Carl and Karen and Liam and a few others. And it became a bit of an overnight success with over 1,000 businesses, Highland-based businesses, joining within 2 weeks. Currently, we've got 1,600 Highland-based businesses in the group, and we're just in the process of building a web directory. So it's exciting times, but delighted to have you along.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, John. So before we kick off with some of the questions that all of the leaders so far have been asked, ladies and gentlemen, is just give us an overview of what it is you're going to deliver for Highland businesses, particularly if you're successful getting into the next parliamentary term.
Well, first of all, thank you, Liam and John, for the very kind invitation and the opportunity to come and speak to you. And I'm delighted that my colleague Rhoda Grant can join us on the call as well. Can I just say a couple of things just in opening, and then we'll go into the actual detail of the questions. First of all, there's a recognition about how difficult a year it has been for all of you, not just in terms of for your families and for your wider health and well-being, but also for your businesses. I completely recognise how big a challenge it has been, and then how that in itself has impacted negatively on people's health and well-being. And two main points I would make is, one, we can't fall into the trap, and I think there is a risk of this. We can't fall into the trap of thinking that the challenges for business and the challenges for employability will end the day the lockdown fully ends, or end the day the virus disappears. This is going to take time, and it's going to take a lot longer than people might expect for us to get to even pre-COVID levels, never mind get to better than COVID levels. So I want us to make sure that we have proper transitional support for businesses as we come through the aftermath of this pandemic, and also make sure there's no cliff edge on the furlough scheme at the same time as well. And the second general, you're laughing at me bouncing about here, Liam, I can see that. That's the Glasgow potholes, by the way. So I wasn't going to say the second thing is investing properly in our roads infrastructure, but maybe I should say that at this moment is investing properly in our roads infrastructure. But the second point I was going to make was, every political party is talking about recovery. And I think a key part that often gets missed about recovery is it can't be a central belt recovery. It can't be a recovery that is a politician sitting in Glasgow, or a group of politicians sitting in a parliament in Edinburgh, and it ends up being a recovery that works for the central belt. If it's genuinely going to be a recovery that works for everyone, then it has to be a recovery that is north, east, south and west, and a recovery that is urban, rural, coastal, island communities as well. And the way we do that is, yes, have funding support, yes, try and spike support in terms of construction industry and such like, and jobs guarantee, but it's also got to make sure that we're pushing power and resource outside of the central belt into the different local authorities and partner local authorities across Scotland if we are going to make it work. So I want to push power, and I want to push resource out to genuine local enterprise agencies working in partnership. And that's the final point I'll make in closing, is we are not going to overcome the challenges that we face in our economy and in our country if this is being seen as a public sector only approach, or a public sector and voluntary sector only approach. We will only truly succeed and come through this if it's a genuine partnership between the public, voluntary and the private sector. and you have a full commitment from me that we want to be the party of business and work with business to rebuild and regrow our economy so it works for everyone across the whole country. But I'll stop there. I don't know if Rhoda wants to add anything to that.
Well, actually, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to ask Rhoda just to add a little bit here, because this will be maybe a little bit closer to your heart as well, Rhoda. And apologies for the potholes. Wait till you come up here, Anas, and you'll know what it's all about. You'll be needing a Sherman tank. In terms of the Highlands and Islands, we're obviously blessed with many natural assets, you know, and our contribution to Scotland's biggest industries, food and drink, tourism, the green energy. But it's often thought up here that we don't have a strong enough voice in Holyrood. Rhoda, do you think that's a fair comment? And if so, what changes would you propose to get closer links with the region and local businesses to Holyrood?
I find that a lot, and that's one of the things I do, you know, when I was an MSP representing the area, trying to make people understand the different challenges. Now, post-pandemic, a lot of the challenges are the same and we need to address them. But there's also issues in the Highlands about the diversity of types of business. So a lot of businesses fell through the cracks. And, you know, I have been taking that back to government, you know, right up until the kind of 11th hour before this election. I was having meetings with government saying, look, these people have fallen through the cracks. You need to do something about it. You need to support them because, you know, and this is something I think that is key to our manifesto, you know, devolving power from UK to Edinburgh is only one thing. We need to devolve the power from Edinburgh down to the councils, because the councils are very aware of what business needs in their communities are, but they were totally restricted in how they could offer that business support. So we need to empower them, allow them to do that. And we also need to even take that further from councils, because, you know, you work in the Highlands, you know, as well as I do, that, you know, when you reach kind of North Sutherland, you feel a distance, not from Edinburgh and London, but also from Inverness. Yeah. So it's about trying to then push the councils to devolve that power into communities as well. And that's something that we're very keen on in our manifesto. So I would hope that that would give us a strong, because it's not even so much a strong voice. If you've got the levers of power, you can use them locally rather than have to be kind of banging the drum all the time. And that would be my preference, that you wouldn't need to be banging the drum. You would actually have, you would have the power to do what was best for your own communities.
Yeah, we'd actually like to have the drum ourselves, Rhoda. That would be quite handy.
That's that, Liam, just really briefly. It's like, obviously we've got these national agencies like Business Gateway and Business Enterprise and Scottish Enterprise, sorry. I think we need to repurpose and refocus them. And what I mean by that is, I think, and I thought this before the pandemic actually, and it's probably like feel the same like coming through the pandemic, is it often feels like both Scottish Enterprise and Business Gateway end up supporting projects that are probably likely to succeed anyway. And so therefore they're targeted towards the glory projects rather than those businesses that genuinely need that extra nudge and extra support. So I want to change the focus of Scottish Enterprise and Business Gateway, so they become like recovery agencies. And so they're doing targeted support towards sectors that need that extra bit of support. And then also doing that in much greater partnership with the Highlands and Islands Enterprise, because you'll know this, and again, I emphasize this, a politician from Glasgow and a parliament in Edinburgh isn't going to automatically understand or appreciate the economic challenges you face in your own local area, your own locality. You will understand better than us about what are the sectors that need that extra support locally. You will understand better than us where the opportunities are in terms of where we can create new employment. And you will understand better than us about what are the sectors that need that extra bit of support so they can maintain their level of workforce coming through this pandemic. So how do we change that focus? I think it needs to be a really, really important part of building that recovery.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Absolutely great points. Just on that as well, then, what actual packages would you put in place now that we're now open, or our shops are starting to open again, and particularly tourism businesses, with a chance to support those businesses for an opening of a full season come April next year? What other support packages do you feel that need to be in place just now? I know we've had a raft of different measures, but what would you propose to be able to support those businesses to get to next April, to give them a chance of a full season's trading?
Yeah, so a number of things, Liam. One is I want us to have a business transition fund which recognises the transitional support packages that businesses are going to need going in, and that should be targeted at certain sectors as well. So how do you give tapered support that recognises it's going to take time to get back to pre-COVID levels? So let's have that business transition fund. Alongside that, we're going to need a transitional training fund. So how do you invest in the workforce and help teach them the new skills they might need in the new economic environment that may face them? Alongside that, the tourism industry in particular is facing a challenge. So I want us, we can't wait till April. A lot of these tourism agencies can't wait till April before they get their support, because to be frank, if you wait till April, they'll go bust.
Yeah.
So that's why we proposed the Great Scottish Staycation Policy, which is about the off-peak periods where we're saying to people, no matter where you're traveling from across the UK and the Republic of Ireland, if you book 2 nights in Scotland, you get a 3rd night for free. That's to encourage people to come and enjoy Scotland, see parts of Scotland and invest in Scotland. And alongside that, we've also done the largest economic stimulus package that we've had using the powers of Holyrood, which is to give a £75 prepaid card to every adult in Scotland, and make that they can only spend that in non-food retail, not only spend that on the high street and not online. Therefore, we can, one, change the behaviour and get people confident again to get out and spend in the high streets, but also spend money out and about in different parts of Scotland to give people that support they need, so we can keep businesses open, protect high streets and create employment. Alongside that, in terms of the other packages, again, I want to push the power out from Scottish Enterprise and Business Gateway and from the Parliament, and really empower local agencies, back it up with money so they can invest in the industries of the future to create jobs and to protect jobs.
Yeah, Rhoda, you want to add anything to that? It's pretty comprehensive to me.
It is pretty comprehensive, and I think it's really important that it is, because I suppose if you're talking about tourism, we've had a year of winters, and we're trying to add an extra summer in there by looking at those kind of shoulder months to see if we can expand the season for, and that gives people a wee boost. You know, if they have a longer season, at least they'll make up some of the lost ground. And it also attracts in, you know, staycation, reasonably local people. Once you get them coming for 2 or 3 nights, the chances are they'll come back. And, you know, if we can build that kind of local market, it's safe and it's accessible to us. So I think it would work really well for the Highlands and Islands.
No, thanks very much for that, Rhoda.
Liam, just on that, because the other interesting stat I heard just last week is, so I completely, so there's a reason why we're doing the staycation policy, because, you know, international travel and long distance travel is going to be a challenge coming through the pandemic. But we've also got to recognize that that in itself is not going to be a full fix, and because I think the stats was you spend like a third on a staycation policy, on a staycation, than you would if you're an international traveller coming from another part of Europe or another part of the world and coming to spend in Scotland. So I'm not going to pretend that the staycation policy in itself is going to fill the full gap for businesses locally, or for the hospitality sector, or for the tourism sector. But what it is a stimulus package to give a shot in the arm, to save jobs, to keep them going, so that when we do get international travel started again, businesses are there and they continue to exist, and we can support them.
No, I appreciate that. It's never going to be a complete fix right away. John, you want to come in there? Are you still with us, John?
Still with you. I'm still with you. No, it's all good. I was just going to make the point, there was a really good article about remoteness in the Northern Times, Rhoda. You might be able to look that up. It's one of the Highland News and Media, and Anas perhaps too, Highland News and Media's titles for that year. And Sutherland is actually one of the most remote parts of the UK, and he talks about the economy. It's a really interesting article on how much per head of capita the Highland region gets compared to other regions. So we're maybe lagging behind. So no, all good.
Thanks, John. Thanks for coming back in. We have huge skill shortages with our young people leaving the Highlands, and the worry is that they don't come back to work, live here, when there's such a beauty and abundance of tourism and opportunities to do that. What packages would you put in place to try and bridge the gap in affordable housing for young folk to get on that ladder and actually live and work here and keep their further education here in the Highlands?
Liam, I think that's a really, really important question. And so I've got family in the north of Scotland. So although from Grampian, so my family is originally from Lossiemouth. So that's where my family settled, and I've still got uncles and aunts in Lossiemouth and Elgin, and cousins in Lossiemouth and Elgin. But one of the things that really struck me was more than half of them had to leave, not because they wanted to leave, but they were forced to leave because they just couldn't learn the skills they wanted to do. They couldn't get the training they wanted. They couldn't go to work in the sectors they wanted. And then when they did move, they made relationships outside of where they were, and then largely never went back, and only go back to see. That's not fair. So we shouldn't be forcing young people to have to leave their local community because they're not getting an opportunity local. So in terms of aspiration, I'll come to the specifics in a second. In terms of aspiration, we should want no young person to be forced to leave their local community to go elsewhere because of a lack of opportunity. That means we should give them all to learn local, to train local, to work local, to bring up their family local, to have quality local public services, including education, including NHS, to bring their family up in a safe and secure way local, to retire local, and to have a successful local economy at the same time. That should be our collective interest in terms of the mission. How do we do that in practice? That's partly around creating employability, creating jobs. So how again do we support local communities in order to promote the sectors that are going to work for them to create businesses and create jobs local? It's about making sure we have much more outreach in terms of our education. Take the NHS as an example. You're more likely to keep someone local in terms of delivering health services if they train locally as well. So how do we have proper training local so people can learn the new skills and give back to the local community at the same time? In terms of some of the specific schemes, obviously we had a successful jobs guarantee scheme coming through the banking crisis. I want to extend that further. I want us to have a jobs guarantee scheme for everyone under 25, but also for the long-term unemployed. I want us to create 5,000 new apprenticeships, not at the really low-paid apprenticeship level, but them doubling their pay, so attracting more young people to come forward. I want us to back that up with a £500 skills payment. So that's a drawdown account where people can learn new skills, whether they're on furlough, learn new skills in case they need to move on from the employment they're currently on if the furlough doesn't end well for them, or if they're long-term unemployed, learn a new skill, and we would add an additional payment for the long-term unemployed so they can earn while they train and then go into that permanent employment. And alongside that is making sure we're investing in the businesses of the future locally. On housing is a really, really important point because we have all these massive targets around how many houses we're going to build across Scotland. We don't meet the targets, and worse still, the local communities don't get anywhere near their proportionate share of the new houses in terms of rural and remote areas, which is not good enough. So nowhere near. So we want to set up a new housing agency and make the role of the housing agency to identify the lands where we want to build those homes across Scotland, and give them the teeth and the power to make sure that is a fair distribution of that housing. That's a fair distribution in terms of quality of housing, but also then a fair distribution in terms of the employability that comes from building those homes. We also then want the new housing agency to be able to make sure those homes are affordable. So we want 120,000 social rent homes across the country. We want them then to regulate rents as well, so there's not excessive rents and people are priced out of the housing market at the same time. And alongside that, we want to make sure that there's not only a geographical spread of those homes, not just a fair rents, but also making sure there's a fair level of accessible homes given the number of people who have disabilities and particular challenges across the country as well. So how do we lead by example through government, I think is a really important part of that.
Thanks very much, Anas. Rhoda, do you want anything to add there? Your time here.
Yeah, not really, to be honest. I think the only thing I would flag is the home ownership support scheme, where there is a shared equity scheme for a new build or existing homes to allow young people to get in. So they wouldn't be looking at big upfront costs, but the public purse would hold an equity share, which would make it keep those homes in local hands.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for that, Rhoda. We're going to come back to the green issue, so I'll just signpost that for you just now, but I want to touch on mental health because we're talking about young folk leaving. It's a big issue, particularly for young males in the Highlands and Islands. In terms of that, it was a huge issue pre-COVID. Now come post-COVID, what plans in your manifesto do you have to tackle that and to assist in the Highlands?
So we already know, Liam, what pandemic is going to follow this viral pandemic. It's going to be a mental health pandemic. We've got a generation of young people who are too scared to even hug their grannies. And anybody that has looked in their children's eyes over particularly this lockdown will know the huge toll it's taken on them in terms of their mental health and well-being. So we have a huge challenge in terms of how we address that. There's some short-term things we need to do, but there's also some longer-term things we need to do as well. Urgently need to do. When I say longer-term, shorter-term, you'll see in a moment what I mean by that. In terms of what we need in the short term, particularly for younger people, is we've got to recognize that they've taken a hit in terms of the mental health and well-being. And so there's been a lot of conversation about how we have a catch up on education. What I want us to do is I want for every single pupil across the country, I want there to be an individual assessment for every single pupil. I want that assessment to include a mental health assessment. For those people that require additional support, I want there to be one-on-one tutoring. For those that require additional mental health support, there should be one-on-one counselling made available to them. I want us to have a summer comeback pass, which is about free access to sport, to culture, to facilities, funding for local community organisations, so we can get young people back engaged, socialising with other young people, so they can rekindle their friendships, they can make new friendships, and they can get their mental health and well-being back on track and being raring to go after the summer holidays. I want us to roll out the accessibility of mental health support to not just secondary schools. Why stop there? Let's have it available in primary schools, in secondary schools. Let's also make sure we're helping to support workplaces, college and university campuses, also to have access to mental health support. We know that 1/3 of the people that go and see a GP practice are going with an issue related to their mental health. GPs aren't always the best people to address those challenges. There should be a mental health worker in every GP practice across the country. And then we need to make, and you've emphasized the point around the Highlands and Islands, is not everyone's going to be able to get a face-to-face appointment really close to home. So some of the things that the managers in the health service told us were never possible, but have become possible through the pandemic. We need to replicate some of those models. So the ability to use digital, for example. So we have crisis mental health services, counselling services that are available digitally. So when people do get themselves in a situation, they've got that support that they need. But again, I'll go back to the economy. We cannot separate not just the pandemic impact on mental health, but you can also separate businesses, the pressure on those businesses, the threat of businesses closing, the threat of people losing their jobs, and the fear of not being able to provide from their families, also impacting on people's mental health and well-being at the same time. So let's get the right mental health services. Let's get local NHS services. Let's digitalize our mental health services, but let's also get to grips with the economy, because there's a direct link between success of the economy and people's mental health and well-being.
Definitely. Thank you very much for that. It's great to hear. Opportunities have arisen for some, and the awareness and the need to look after our planet has clearly been a huge one of those opportunities that's coming about, and a need that needs to be done. What incentives would you introduce in terms of environmental friendly packaging, more resource around electric vehicles, energy reduction solutions? What's your plans for those, particularly with ourselves in the Highlands and the distances that we have?
Yeah, so a number of things within that. Again, one is I've talked a bit about Scottish Enterprise and Business Gateway and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We should make a condition in terms of any financial support we give to businesses that yes, they've got to meet conditions around pay and conditions of the workforce, but also around a carbon reduction plan. We should make that part of incentivizing, giving support. You mentioned about public transport. If we're honest, we've had a lot of conversations about digital connectivity across Scotland in this particular last year. We've still got a long way to go to strengthen digital connectivity, but also our physical connectivity isn't great in large parts of the country as well. So we've got free bus travel for pensioners, but there's no point giving people bus passes if they don't have routes to go on either. So how do we diversify our routes? How do we create more free transport opportunities? Therefore making parts more accessible. In terms of electric vehicles, how do we get more opportunities around electric vehicles, But at the same time, people are going to less likely to get electric vehicles if they're not confident about the charging units and where the charging units are across the country. So how do we get more incentives around people acquiring electric vehicles, but also making sure we're installing more electric units across the country? We've suggested, for example, a circular economy bill around how we can create a more circular economy to help support the environment. Alongside our job creation scheme, a couple of proposals within our job creation scheme is one, a new conservation core, which actually will disproportionately benefit, I think, our rural communities and remote communities, where we want to create 10,000 jobs amongst young people and task them with going out there to confront the climate emergency and the nature emergency across the country. So how do we create employment around that at the same time? And then in terms of our investment in the new industries of the future, how do we make sure we have an investment in those sectors to create green, renewable jobs, sustainable jobs that help the environment, but also help to create employment across the country? That has to be our relentless focus over the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Rona, do you want to come in anything there with the Rhoda?
I suppose just emphasising a couple of things. We're looking at retrofitting homes so that they're much more carbon neutral. So that not only helps people in the Highlands Islands who are off gas grid and where fuel poverty is a big issue, also creates jobs, because that retrofitting needs to be carried out, and we're always pushing that jobs should be more local rather than centralised. With electric vehicles as well, we're proposing an interest-free loan. They are expensive, and Anas is right that there's no point having one, especially in people, when people have high mileages, because you're traveling big distances in the Highlands and Islands. You need to have the points to charge them, but they're cheaper to run, obviously. And if you had interest-free loans, it might make it more affordable to people who actually spend a lot of money on their cars just to get about. So I think all of those things are important.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Just one final question as a kind of a wrap up before we ask you just to give your final pitch to the businesses that we're going to be watching in the Highlands this evening. Many businesses are still being excluded, obviously in the Highlands and in Scotland and across the UK, and other sectors really struggling, the beauty sector, events, hospitality and tourism, as we've talked about, the arts and musicians. What support can you promise or give or would like to push forward to make sure that they get through to the end of the year to get some trading under the belt? Because bounce back loans are about to start again. I know that all too well myself. Going, how am I going to repay this over 100 years, et cetera, et cetera. So how are you going to be able to support those businesses who need that help?
Liam, again, I think it's a really important question, and actually it probably requires a much fuller answer, but I'll try and summarise as best I can with the time we've got. The first thing to recognise is there are too many people that are excluded, and particularly I think about the self-employed. It's a massive issue. I think that's one huge part. I've already referenced the transition fund. I've already referenced the fact that we can't have a cliff edge on furlough. But one of the other big frustrations I think the business have felt is that the government's been really, really good, in my view, at been announcing big pots of money, but then the dispersal of that money has been haphazard and some often slow. And that's largely because of the partnership with local government. So the government announces the budget, local government operates and disperses the budget. Guidance is then created. And what happens is businesses are told when they apply, sorry, you don't meet the criteria because it's not in the guidance. And then when they go to the Scottish Government says, we've provided the funds, it's for the local authority to disperse. And businesses are caught in the middle and it's just not good enough. So we've got to stop that, and we've got to get greater communication and greater consistency of the support. Further to that is a lack of communication. There is for so many sectors, the communication is really, really bad. Think of the aviation sector being one, the music industry being another. For hotels, I understand obviously better days now than it has been previously, but still a challenge, is communicate with people and create a route map, because the idea that we just make an announcement and then everything goes back to normal isn't rooted in reality. It takes time to prepare, and that inconsistency and lack of communication can itself hamper businesses and make it really difficult for them. The next thing I'd say is businesses are actually really, really good at changing themselves and preparing for the new environment that faces them. We've got to trust them a bit more. We've got to communicate with them, of course, police them, of course. There will always be bad apples, but we can't sacrifice whole sectors because of a few bad apples. So support business to be able to make sensible decisions about how they can restart themselves and grow themselves, and then give them long-term support. We are not going to come out of this in weeks and months. This is going to take time. So we've got to make sure we've got that long-term support there for them. If we go back to the same old models of we think the crisis is over, let's pull back support, businesses will collapse, businesses will shut down, unemployment will spike, and we'll be in an even deeper economic crisis. We have to invest our way out of this, not cut our way out of this.
Absolutely, yeah, that is key. Collaboration is key, as we found that in the Highlands, and speaking to one another at that level is really what we need. Just before we wrap up, John, just a quick word from yourself, and I'll get Rhoda and Anas to give us their final words.
No, well, I'm now stopped just outside Alness looking at the oil rigs, which are hopefully going to be the hydrogen centre of the Scotland soon. A lot of work coming up here and renewables in the Highlands, but thank you for coming along. And a quick question for Rhoda before I leave. You've been on many food and drink hustings. Food and drink is through my blood. Are you the next Labour representative for the food and drink?
If you want her to be, John, I'll sort it.
He speaks well, innit?
I'll leave you to discuss that between you.
And in fairness, John, food and drink does run through your veins on that final.
And it is incredibly important to the Highlands and Islands as well. We produce some of the best in the world, and we need to make sure we get top dollar for that and keep those jobs adding value in our area. So rest assured that if I'm elected, that'll be top of my list of priorities to make sure those jobs stay and grow. Thanks very much, Rhoda. Anas, I'm going to leave it with you. You've got a minute to wrap up before we let you go up to the climbing wall.
No, thank you. Honestly, look, Liam and John, I can promise you that Rhoda is never shy in fighting for the Highlands and Islands, and she is always making sure that we have a Highlands Islands focus in all of our discussions and of all of our policy making, all our debates in the Parliament. So you generally do have a true champion for the Highlands Islands. And Rhoda, I'm not just saying that because she's on the call. She delivers that every single day in terms of making the case. Just a simple message, both to Liam and John, is look, I recognise this is not a light switch moment. We aren't going to automatically get things back to normal in the Highlands Islands. You need that long-term support. We have an opportunity coming through this pandemic to build something different and to reshape our economy so it works for everyone. And if we are going to have a recovery that works for everyone, we've got to push power and resource out from the Parliament into local communities where you will know better about the needs for your local community. And a final message from me directly is I promise them I'm not someone that pretends that I have all the answers. I'm not someone that pretends that only my ideas are the right ideas. I want to work with people to make sure we've got the right ideas for the right areas to make sure we build a fairer and better Scotland. And if you agree with us, then please make sure you're voting Labour on the 6th of May, and together we will build that stronger, fairer, more equal nation, not just for some parts of Scotland, but for all of Scotland. Thank you very much indeed. Rhoda, Anas, thanks very much indeed. John from the Highland Business Partnership, the guys here at DP Digital Media. And when you're up that climbing wall, we'd like to thank all the political leaders that have come in. So if you can find wee Nicola up there as well, get her to give us a shout, because we're still here north of Perth for an interview. Thanks very much, and we'll leave you at that.